Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Friends of Mortgage Heroes. I'm Andy.
I'm Will.
And today with us, we have our friend Jason Turner with J. Turner Law Group. And Jason has been a friend of mine since 2007. I want to say back when I was at the other office, we had a second office and you had another office. So we've been business neighbors for going on 17 years now. Yep. Jason and I have known each other in a personal context, business context. Jason is a specialist in bankruptcy and also certain facets of real estate law. So today we're going to talk about some of that background, kind of how that you got to where you're at today in your practice, and I want to educate some people on some things regarding bankruptcy and real estate, and then also some of what maybe some investors need to know about with some tenant law stuff that's going on in San Diego. So there's a lot of history here. We've networked together for many years. We've been business neighbors. Jason and I have conducted business together. So Jason, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Great to be here.
Yeah. So first of all, let's get everyone kind of like up to speed on like, okay, what do you do? What is your specialty? Where are you at? Tell us a little bit about your practice.
Yeah. Well, I've been an attorney since 1992, so almost 30 years of actual practicing law. I have my own practice. I've been a solo practitioner for about 13 years. In the past, I worked for private firms, for the U.S. government, as well as for in the nonprofit sector for a legal aid organization. But since about 2008, 2009, I've been in practice for myself. And as you mentioned in the intro, my specialties are bankruptcy law and also real estate, particularly real estate litigation. And so often those clients in those areas have overlapping issues, but often they do not. So many of my bankruptcy clients, mostly on the debtor side, consumers and small businesses that might have financial issues or problems that they're facing. But many of my real estate clients, they don't have financial problems, but they've got some legal issue with the property they own, or they bought, or they're trying to buy, or they're trying to sell.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. Oh my God, that covers like a gamut of ideas.
Yeah.
Things like, which is the next question I should ask. Okay. So I guess I want to know, and I don't know that I know this about you actually. After gloating that I've known you for so long, I don't know what got you into being an attorney. What made you want to become a lawyer?
Well, it was for me a sort of a slow, gradual process when I was in college. There's some people who, by the time they're 7 years old, they know what they want to do in life. But I was not one of those. So I was in college and I love history. I majored in history, and I thought, okay, what can I do with a history degree? And you could teach, but I didn't want to teach. And law was something that was possible, and it was interesting. I sort of got the inspiration from reading, like Tale of Two Cities. There's a lawyer there who's a big character, and also To Kill a Mockingbird. The character of Atticus was, he's sort of cynical, he's sort of sarcastic, but he gets things done with compassion and really, caring about justice. And those are things like when I was in college, like, hey, I could do that. And just one thing led to another. After college, I went to law school up in San Francisco. And then into my legal career.
So was there like a defining moment where you're like, oh, this is the thing I want to do? Like, I mean, because again, you like in mortgage and real estate, most people don't go to school for it. Like, oh, I just fell into it. It doesn't matter. We talk to title people, we talk to insurance people. Like, no one grew up going, I can't wait to be a property and casualty insurance agent when I'm a grown adult, right? So was there like a defining moment where you're like, oh, this is what I want to do?
Like you wanted to argue better against your parents or something like that? Just said like, hey.
I was good at that as a kid, as they both can attest. And maybe that's helped me as a lawyer. But in terms of when there are many areas of law, obviously, and when I got out of law school, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. Many lawyers just sort of fall into what is available at that time. And but then later, this is in the late 90s, I was working at a private firm and doing a lot of business litigation, real estate litigation, and every so often would have to get pulled into the bankruptcy system when the person we were suing filed for bankruptcy. And then I had to figure out, okay, how to navigate through that for a creditor. And then fast forward to the early 2000s when I was working in the nonprofit sector, they asked me to start a bankruptcy program. And bankruptcy, right from the start, in the late 90s when I was starting to do it, it really was interesting to me because a couple of things. One, it's lots of different areas of the law intersect in bankruptcy. You got to deal with real estate law of the state. You've got to deal with community or family law, tax law, commercial code law, all in the same case sometimes. And that's like really cool. And then secondly, especially when you're working on the debtor side, representing people who owe a lot of debt, they're just frazzled. They're anxious.
Of course.
And then when we do the bankruptcy and they get to the end and they get a discharge of debts, it's like not only is there a load off their shoulders, but they see like, oh, okay, there's hope in this part of my life, the financial part.
Yeah.
So then there can be hope in other parts of my life. And I don't help with those other parts, but by helping with this piece, solving the financial issues, using the bankruptcy system to help them, it really helps restore hope.
Yeah.
And that's what I really like.
Wow.
That's awesome. It's so true, right? Because I mean,
really cool.
you first of all, when you go into investments, when it has to be with real estate, obviously, if things don't go your way and the market predicts that you were gonna, like the mortgage meltdown, for instance, I mean, a lot of us weren't well prepared for that. So, and I know a lot of people that can create a lot of mental issues, et cetera. And so you being able and being that extra line of defense for them to be able to fight in their behalf and kind of give them that debt that, okay, you don't have to worry about that debt. It's okay now.
Yeah.
That's a huge relief.
Yeah, because I mean, you're saying this, and I'm imagining that you're meeting people, or they're meeting you at like probably their like worst financial position in life, and may have been caused by them, or may have not. Maybe it's caused by material circumstances that surrounded them. But you're already saying, without saying it this way, it sounds like it's gratifying beyond, okay, we have another case that we were able to, settle and, clear the person for BK and all that, but that there's a personal gratification that comes from that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, when I talk to my clients 3 years, 5 years later, I keep in touch with some of them, more often than not, far more often than not, they're like in a really strong financial position. And it affects other parts of your life.
Yes.
Because finances, your job, your business are such a big part of who you are, what you do, what you pour your heart into. And when you can move forward and you can have success, partly because you overcame the financial problems or even mistakes of the past, that's really energizing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I can attest to that. I remember in Mortgage Meltdown, we had 11 properties, and because they were in the corporation, et cetera, it was hard to just let them go. Where if it was just our primary residence, it's kind of hand over your keys and you're kind of done with that. But in our case, it was far more complicated than that. And we had other assets in the bank. We had lines of credit. We had certain things in there. And when we're fighting, I remember seeing the creditors at the court. Nope, we want our money, but we don't have money to give you.
Yeah, can't give you something I don't have, right?
So I'm glad that people like you, Jason, are there to defend us. And obviously, letting all that go did feel like that huge baggage just off your shoulders, and allowed us now to, well, what's next? How can we actually get our credits back in line so that we can do the things that we've been wanting to do? So it's like a new start.
Yeah. So that's a great segue, because I wanted to make sure we're clarifying for people, if you are a homeowner and you have to file bankruptcy, it doesn't necessarily automatically mean you lose your house. And I think that, and I'm guessing here, maybe you can qualify this for me, but I think most people automatically think I'm going to lose everything, including the roof over my head. But that's not necessarily the case, right?
Right. There's two big issues whenever we're looking at helping a client who has a house, their own home. And right now we're talking just about homeowners, their own principal residence. Number one is, are they behind on the mortgage? Which back in 2008, 2009, that was the biggest driver in my bankruptcy work. A little less so now, but I am seeing it is rising again. So let's say somebody is 9 months behind, 12 months behind on their mortgage, and they're getting the notice of default and the foreclosure process has started. Bankruptcy is a really good way to stop the foreclosure and then permanently stop it and cure that default, especially through a Chapter 13.
Gotcha.
Type of case where you set up a plan over 3 to 5 years to pay off those arrearages and get caught up. The other issue with homeowner is they often, when they first talk to me, they think, I'm current on my mortgage, or maybe I'm just a month behind, but I've got a lot of equity because the market has risen in the last 5-6 years. And I'm afraid, they're just going to sell my house in bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And that is not the case with the vast majority of homeowners in California, especially in the last 2 years, because the state legislature in 2021 increased the homestead exemption.
Okay.
That a homeowner can claim for the equity in their own home for bankruptcy purposes.
Okay.
So for people in San Diego, if they have their own home, if they've owned it for more than about 3.5 years, they can exempt up to about $640,000 or $650,000 of equity
Per individual, or as you're talking about a married couple?
for married couple. For
Is there an
one property.
individual an individual number and a married number, or is it?
It's the same for.
It's the same. Okay.
Okay.
right,
Okay.
and
So
it's
Not like capital
residence.
gains.
well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I know.
250,
I'm over here
250.
like taxes.
Same house, the same exemption they claim.
Okay.
And but they can, many people now, even if they're struggling financially, and we saw this especially in COVID
Yeah.
when businesses shut down or they lost their jobs temporarily, they had debt that was building up, but because of the market, they've owned their house for 5 or 10 years or 15 years, and they had $500,000 of
Yeah.
equity.
Yeah.
And the state legislature changed the law to protect those folks. And so even if we do like a Chapter 7, which is just wiping out credit card debt and medical debt and those kinds of things, we can protect the house.
So you can preserve the equity, and so the court cannot direct the attorney or the representation to pay off the debts by using equity from the house.
Correct.
Wow.
In the vast majority of cases, if it's their own principal residence.
So number one, it's preserved. Number two, you can't force the person to use that in order to make cure debts that they owe.
Correct. If you have a mortgage or a HELOC that's secured by the house, those still have to be paid.
Yeah.
Well,
But we're
right.
talking about other debts that are unsecured, the old business loans, old car loans, credit cards,
Credit cards, things like that.
medical
So
loans.
let's say someone has $100,000 in unsecured debts.
Yep.
You can't take the court cannot force that person to spend $100,000 of equity if they have it on those debts.
Correct.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Well, okay, hold on. But mechanically, that makes sense because as I'm asking the question, I'm also thinking, well, how would they qualify? They're already 9 months late, 12 months late. They're not going to get a mortgage. They're not going to get a line of credit.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I guess
maybe
it
they
wouldn't-
could put a lien on there.
I guess.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I was going to say maybe a lien. Or I said, I guess functionally it wouldn't work either. But yeah.
But like I said, that protection is for the unsecured debt.
Mm-hmm.
For mortgages, if you're 9 months behind, you're 9 months behind, and the mortgage company has the right to foreclose against
Mm-hmm.
the property unless you do a Chapter 13.
Mm-hmm.
The two main types of bankruptcies for individuals are Chapter 7 and Chapter 13.
Wow.
And so the difference is going to be whether you own a home or not own a home, or whether you're going to try to keep a home or let it go. How can you explain the difference between those two options?
So Chapter 7 is primarily for individuals. There are a few main reasons we use Chapter 7. One is if their income is fairly low. By low, there's not a single bright line, but if you're a high-income person, you may not be eligible for Chapter 7.
Oh, okay, I see.
But for many people, especially if they have a lot of secured debt like mortgage, car payments, they're going to be eligible for Chapter 7.
Yeah.
And that's a great way, especially if they're not late on their mortgage, if they're current on that, but they got a lot of other debt, whether it's business debt, old taxes, medical debt, credit cards.
Wow.
That's a great way to get a fresh start, get those wiped out, and then focus on protecting your house and focus on maybe you have other debts that are not dischargeable. And I can talk about that in a minute. So that's great for Chapter 7. Chapter 13 is primarily for people who have income that's too high to qualify for Chapter 7, or they have a mortgage that's behind and they want to save their house by curing the default through a plan, or they have some other assets that they want to keep that otherwise might be liquidated in a Chapter 7
Got it.
case.
Okay. Yeah.
Wow.
So they can have a little more. I guess I'm going to rephrase that to asset protection.
Yeah.
For assets that are held.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Well, both in 7 and 13, there's an aspect of asset protection
Mm-hmm.
because the bankruptcy law, the exemptions, we're talking about like the homestead exemption, they're in the law because Congress recognizes that for somebody who goes through bankruptcy, they need some basic assets in order to move forward. So they're never going to have to file for bankruptcy again.
Right.
And
The goals don't come back to us again. Right.
right. And if you have your home, and that's the basis for stability in the future.
Yeah.
Your car, as long as it's not a Rolls Royce.
Right.
Sell it.
Basic small amounts in your bank account, retirement accounts like a 401k or an IRA. You're going to need that in the future. So and that's one big area where we can help somebody save their retirement accounts, especially when before the bankruptcy, creditors are calling and saying, "Pay us, pay us. Why don't you? Well, we know you have $50,000 in your IRA. Why don't you just withdraw that to pay us?" In bankruptcy, we can we can wipe out the debt, and we can protect those retirement assets that they're going to need later in life.
Right.
That's good. That's good to know. So 401k, whole life insurance, stuff like that gets actually protected in the bankruptcy then.
Well, 401ks and IRAs.
Yeah.
Whole life is a little different.
Okay.
We can often protect portions of that. When we get down to the granular level, it's case by case, and that's why I always want to meet with the client. The first meeting is usually about 45 to 60 minutes, because we're looking through, okay, what are the assets you have? What are the kinds of debts you have? And seeing what are the issues, and then how do we make a game plan to do this as much as we can.
Yeah. I mean, earlier you mentioned taxes. Are we talking about like IRS taxes? You guys can put in a Chapter 7?
Yes. Well, there are different types of taxes. Of course. Income tax is the most common. We all pay income tax. There's also payroll taxes that employers pay. And if I have a company and my company owes payroll taxes, there's a portion of it actually that I, as the individual owner, will be also personally liable for.
Gotcha.
Those are not dischargeable. That portion of
Got
payroll
it.
tax. Sales tax, the same thing. And unfortunately, we're seeing many small businesses, I'm seeing more and more, whether restaurants or other retail businesses, they're falling behind on sales tax. And this is an increasing issue.
Wow.
That I'm seeing as sort of a trend where we've got these big sales tax debts and of say their corporation, but the individual owner is going to be personally liable for it later, and that's not dischargeable.
Wow.
But for income taxes, if the income tax is for more than 3 years ago, if they filed the tax return at least 2 years ago, and it wasn't from a recent assessment by the IRS in the last 8 months, then they can get those income taxes discharged.
Wow.
In a 7 or in a 13.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, good to know that information. I didn't know that. And you're mentioning like you're seeing more small businesses. Is that like after 2020 or in the last year, 2 years? When would you say you're starting to see more activity in that?
In the last year and a half or so, I've noticed that.
Wow.
Now, I can't like point to any statistical report, but that's just my own
your own
anecdotal experience in talking with
I have some speculations I share on this show regularly.
Yeah, no, exactly. And we understand who it is.
Inflation and the Fed being number one and number two. You can argue about which one's in the first place. Number one.
Yeah, the
number
reason
two.
I'm curious because we talk about that quite a bit, on our other show, and it's just like it's always good to have this information as well because obviously it all intertwines together, So
can you share with us, what is a case that like really stands out? Because you talked already about how there's some mechanics involved in 7 versus 13. Okay, got it. There's mechanics involved in whether someone even can qualify for. I mean, it's weird to say qualify for bankruptcy, but there's a differentiation between 7 and 13, and maybe even you can or can't based on other things. So are there some stories that really stand out to you where? Like you've mentioned, people have come back to you years later and they've just got their life is completely different than when you initially met them, and they've come through the door with their bag of problems. And then this 45, 60 minutes go, here's every problem I have. And you go, some of those don't matter. Some of those are legit. And so share with us some, if you have a story or two, like tell us about someone who like made, without naming them, what's something that's occurred that you really think about and you find yourself dwelling on.
Well, a couple of cases. One was a couple. They just have consumer debt.
Yeah.
They had regular jobs. The wife had a disability, and for about 6 months, and that really set them back. They were before that they were keeping up with their payments on credit cards, car loans, mortgage, and then she got disabled and her income went way down, and then that just cascaded into more and more problems. So they came to me, and we did a Chapter 7 for them. And one of the things I remember the most was they had car loans, 2 car loans, like over 20% interest on each one.
Oh, wow.
And those are surprisingly common.
Really?
Those expensive.
I mean, I hear about it, but
car
okay.
loans, yeah. And so not only were we able to get rid of a lot of the credit card debt that had built up because when she was disabled, but we were able to really press those lenders. So they brought the interest rates on those down from say 22% down to 10%, which is still high, but it's a lot better than it was before on both of those.
Wow.
Loans. So we reduced their monthly
By more than half.
payments?
monthly budget by significantly. And so they're and afterwards, I talked to them sometime later, and they said like that was the best thing we did that year, because now we're okay, we're stronger and stronger financially each year, and it's like it also gave them the encouragement that they could tackle the next things that happen in their lives financially. And then I have a thing of another couple who I helped a couple of years ago, and they had some consumer debt, but they'd also had a business they had planned to open. It was like in December of 2019.
Gotcha.
4 months before the shutdown. And they had invested a lot of money, and they'd signed a commercial lease. And like so many people.
Oh my
goodness.
goodness.
Then their whole business plan was ruined by COVID. And so they came out of that with a lot of commercial debt, business debt. And so we did a bankruptcy for them, and we got it all discharged. There was a creditor who was really fighting us hard, but we won, and completely won against that creditor, and got a complete discharge of all of their debts.
Wow.
And now, and they have a large family, and so they feel like, okay, we can do this. We can take care of our family.
Yeah.
And we take care of our financial future, and so there's hope.
Yeah.
And so those are some examples, of a few years ago, pre-pandemic, as well as since the pandemic.
Well, and I can imagine the one you're sharing right now about the business looking to be open right before 2020 and the shutdowns, like there's a multiplier of that happened to tens of thousands of people, I'm sure. Yeah. And, maybe some of them didn't even know that bankruptcy was an option or debt restructuring was an option. And, I think when I'm hearing these stories, these are people that they stepped forward and they kind of overcame maybe any personal embarrassment that might come of this. Because let's be honest, there's like a stigma around bankruptcy. Yeah. I mean, it's like this social faux pas, and it's like a personal black eye, right? And most people can do it out of the public eye, right? Yeah. It's a very private, I guess. It's not a very public thing.
Well, I think
unless the public things have to be made public.
Yeah, I think Donald Trump put all that perspective for us. Made it, it's like, okay, well, I did it 5 times, no big deal.
I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about.
And the interesting thing is, he never did a personal bankruptcy, but he bankrupted like multiple companies.
Yeah. Well, he never owned anything, right? He just I'm not supposed to own anything. I'm just supposed to control it.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
So,
I have my own perspective on that stigma part that you were talking about.
So,
So, yes, there's a lot of in our society, in our culture. There's the ethic, as it were, to I pay all my bills. I do everything. I keep current and all my obligations. And of course, that's important, and it really it's the basis for good living.
Mm-hmm.
But life happens, and often my view, and this is my view as a bankruptcy attorney, is that these days in the 21st century, that push to you should feel bad about bankruptcy is driven not so much by our culture, but by big creditors.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Big creditors, big banks, they don't want us to use the bankruptcy system that they themselves would certainly hire an attorney to use if they were facing financial.
Wow, that's an aha moment. That was like one of those.
Yeah. So you're saying that. You know what I immediately remembered? Remember there's this. Oh man, I wish I could remember who was credited with this quote. But like, if you owe the bank $1,000, that's your problem. if you owe the bank $1 million, that's the
That's
bank's
their
problem. Who's I don't know, if you remember who that was, comment in the box. I don't remember who it was. I maybe even have the numbers wrong, but you get the idea. It's kind of what you're saying too a little bit, right? Like, the banks, if you owe them millions and millions of dollars, that's their issue.
Yeah.
Especially if you're in a position where, hey, something happened in your life and now I cannot fulfill the debt obligation or paying on my debt obligation, that becomes a big problem to them.
Yeah. But for most of us, when we have debt issues, it's not millions of dollars, at least most of my clients.
Yeah.
Most of them, it's, okay, I got $40,000 of credit card debt, or, I've got $50,000 of old car loans. I can't afford to keep these cars. Some clients I have, they do owe several $1 million. But for those of us, when we get into debt problems in the tens of thousands or maybe 100,000, you still have these creditors. They are pressing and pressing, and they want to discourage us from utilizing the bankruptcy system.
Right.
I will say another trend. We were talking about the that first trend. Another thing that is really popping up with business owners who I talk with these days is the merchant cash advance agreements.
I was
Sometimes
going
they're
to ask you
called
about that. Okay, great.
Receivable purchase agreements. They come under different names, but it's basically where this lender it's really a loan, but they're buying the ARs of a company, or usually it's the accounts receivable.
Yeah.
And then the borrower has to pay every week, sometimes every day, every business day, and seeing more and more of those. They're more and more common partly because they're so easy to get, and it's partly because they're unregulated.
Gotcha.
Because they're not counted as loans.
And they're easy to get because the interest rate is high and you get paid every week as a lender and all that kind of stuff, right? So oh, you're in a pinch. Let me help you. Let me help you. But maybe you're end up in a bigger pinch.
So
it's more of a loan shark.
Well, it's they're buying. They're saying, okay, we'll buy $100,000 of your ARs,
Yeah.
Mr. or Ms. Small Business Owner, and we'll give you $60,000.
Yeah.
Or $70,000.
Yeah.
And you've got to pay us back, every day or every week, and it's a killer for small businesses.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I already shaved my head, but that's a big haircut.
Yeah.
60 grand for 100 grand? That's not a good swap in my opinion.
That's a scalping.
That's a scalp. Boom, show over. Thank you, Jason. So
I'm glad to make my contribution.
Yeah, there you go.
Speaking of being witty, and so there's a lot of more options for people than maybe they're aware of, and they're probably learning that right here in the show. Like, there's a lot more choices, a lot more maybe flexibility, because I think on the outside looking in, if you're unfamiliar with the bankruptcy process, there are some things that maybe that are stigmatized, number one. Number two, I shouldn't do it for this reason or for that reason, or I'm destroying my financial future and this and that. But if you're already in that like glut of financial problem, like there's below the bottom, there's not much further to go before you're like looking back up again. And you have to go, hey, I got to do something here. Because if I got 100 grand of personal debt and I can't cure that, and I'm not employed or employable or whatever the reason is, there's got to be a solution. And I'm really glad you shared some stories around that today, because I think that hopefully gives people some hope that you're not just going to be, in the dumps forever.
Yeah, no, especially when, you're talking about equity. And a lot of us have been very fortunate that we've been homeowners. We have this appreciation in our home. We feel like if we go through bankruptcy, we lose everything. So this is actually a breath of fresh air, realizing that Congress has stepped up and said, no, we can save some of that stuff that you've actually earned, right? And I like that you mentioned that, because I think that gives a lot more hope to people as well, and encouragement, like, hey, let me get out of this situation I'm in when I can still save where I'm living at.
Yeah. And I think on the real estate note, I think there's currently, and this is kind of a pivot in our conversation, but currently there's a lot of I think there's a lot of confusion. I hear confusion about whether you can and cannot evict people, what you can do, depending on whether you're the owner landlord, or you have an entity or a corporation or an LLC that is the owner landlord of that property or multiple properties. So I want to talk about some of that today too, because let's clear the air. Like, what's going on with evictions and bankruptcies if you own them, but then also when can you evict people if you are not going through bankruptcy? Because you mentioned real estate law earlier. Talk to us about that. Educate us, because there's a lot of uncertainty, or let's say misinformation about this right now.
Right, and part of that in California, and probably in most states around the U.S., but certainly in California that I'm familiar with as a California attorney, is the law quite honestly, landlord-tenant law has been in flux for the last 4 years because of COVID. We had established landlord-tenant law, and then the state legislature in 2020 put a big moratorium on almost all residential foreclosures that were based on not paying your rent. And for good policy reasons, because they didn't want suddenly hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets. And so everything slowed down, the rules changed. Most of those moratoriums in California were lifted in 2022 and in 23.
23.
So
LA.
we're back to now a sort of established permanent law. Now, that being said, it has changed. The permanent law has changed in several big ways. And that is when it comes to evictions, especially for a residential tenant who's been in their place more than a year. California law, just before the pandemic, had already been changed to require for those tenants that they be evicted either for cause or no cause. And no cause is a very limited number of reasons that a landlord could just decide for a long-term tenant, okay, I just want to terminate your month-to-month tenancy and for you to be gone. Limited the number of the reasons that a justifications that a landlord can use. Some of those justifications are if the landlord is moving their own family into the unit, or they're taking it off the market, like they're just going to sell the property, or they're going to do substantial renovations or remodeling.
What's substantial mean?
Yeah.
The statute it does define it. It's a complicated definition, but it really boils down to significant changes that require that nobody be living there at the
Got
time.
it. More than like we're just painting the walls,
Right.
Or I'm going to
Or-
replace the kitchen, appliances.
I'm going to take out the plumbing in the kitchen. Not that, but something big like, okay, we're removing. Let's say there was asbestos in this thing. We got to take everything out, or we've got to change the entire plumbing system, and that's going to take
Oh, wow.
60, 90 days.
Got it. Okay.
And I've got a few cases like that right now. In fact, one of our mutual friends, Emmanuel, is helping in a case where we've got a property, and the landlord knows that there needs to be some substantial modifications.
Yeah.
He's going to be the contractor doing those.
Okay.
Our mutual friend, and that is a valid justification
Wow.
for terminating that long-term lease.
Wow.
Got it.
But
Good
there
to
are
know.
limits. So we got state law.
Okay.
Then in the city of San Diego and the city of Chula Vista, we've got additional restrictions, and they're really in place of the state law because they're more restrictive than the state law.
Oh, they are. Okay.
And by the way, whether it's state law or San Diego or Chula Vista, if a landlord is, and these are the general rules, if they are terminating the lease for no cause, like the tenant didn't do anything wrong, but substantial renovations, for instance, they have to offer rental relocation assistance to the tenant.
Whoa.
State law says 1 month's rent, either paid or waiving the final month of rent. City of San Diego says 2 months. Chula Vista says 2 months of assistance. And if the tenant is a senior, over 65, in at least the city of San Diego, it's even, I think it's three months.
Wow.
Whoa. So another layer.
An additional.
Yeah. And now, we were asking, well, when do those apply? What
Yeah.
if it's a corporation that owns it? What
Sure.
if it's a husband and wife, an individual that's the landlord? State law and the city of San Diego ordinance and the city of Chula Vista
Yeah.
ordinance, they do not apply where the dwelling, the property, is like a single-family home or a condo or a townhome that can just be, it's an individual property that could be sold on its own. So that's not an apartment and a duplex.
Yeah.
or
Right. Multifamily kind of
multifamily.
situation.
But single family or condos or townhomes that are owned by an individual, essentially, not by a corporation, not by a real estate trust, but by individuals or their own living trust.
Gotcha.
Through they own it. if it's a single family home owned by an individual, it's not subject to the state law, and it's not subject to the City of San Diego ordinance or the City of Chula Vista
Whoa.
ordinance, as long as the landlord gives notice of that exemption to the tenant ahead of time.
So that's the difference then. Giving notice to the tenant that they're exempt.
Yes, and that it's a single family home and a
Well,
condo,
right.
and
Got it.
Yeah, assuming all those other variables, they also have to then notify the tenant, hey,
Yeah.
we're exempt from this rule over here.
Right.
Got it.
Right.
Whoa.
Okay, so,
So
are you
if
handling
you go-
cases with that like right now? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm asking because I think you are, but
Yeah.
okay.
So, and it is tricky, definitely, even if it's, an individual who owns one rental property, a house, whatever jurisdiction the
Yeah.
property's in, best to talk to a good real estate attorney
Well, it sounds like it.
before doing the eviction, because it's complicated, because these cities and even the state law have a lot of exceptions, and they're nested in, and reading the statute or the ordinance takes work. So,
Now-
but we find exemptions and we use those. For
Yeah.
my
So when you
landlord
have this
clients.
document, how do you hand it over? Do you get a third party to go kind of like a serve them? Or
Yeah, sometimes if you're starting with a 60-day notice,
yeah.
or if the tenant's done something wrong, it's a 3-day notice followed by another 3-day notice. There are different ways to serve it. The landlord, pre-litigation, can serve those.
Got it.
And often they just go and they knock on the door and they give it to their tenant. A process server we sometimes use as well.
Yeah, just today, third party. I didn't give it to him. He did. There's proof, right? There's proof. I mean, what about some people like they're kind of going through the same thing? They probably don't understand the rules, and they just kind of give this 60-day notice, right? And they're saying, hey, we're going to sell the home. But then the tenant realizes they got out and the home wasn't even sold. They probably put it in the market and said, hey, we couldn't sell in 30 days. How does something like that? I'm sure people just figure out tactics how to.
Yes.
Are you asking if there's recourse on that? Or?
Yeah, correct.
Right. If you have a landlord that's sort of gaming the system,
Yeah.
so to speak, yes. Well, the general answer is if the landlord falsely used some reason and try to qualify under the statute, then it could be later on, if the tenant discovers the truth, they could file what's called a wrongful eviction
Okay.
lawsuit against the landlord for their extra costs of having to move out, maybe paying higher rents, all those other costs. There are some provisions in the City of San Diego's ordinance and also City of Chula Vista's that require, I know at least with the City of San Diego, let's say I'm a covered landlord. I have it's an apartment complex, and I evict somebody, and maybe it was because I was going to do substantial repairs.
Yeah.
And or I was saying, I was going to move my family in there, and I didn't do that. Then I have to offer, when it's apartments available, I have to offer it back to that old tenant
Oh,
within
wow.
a certain amount of time. So give them a first opportunity to come back.
Like
and-
right of refusal.
Jeez.
Is
In a
it
way.
is it a right of refusal? It's probably called something else
Yeah,
because
it's
I only
like
use
that.
words I know.
Yeah.
Jason uses a lot of words I don't know.
Yeah,
So-
the same idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, the question being, like, can someone falsely come up with a reason to try to do an eviction? But there's
Yeah.
basically in my words, a clawback where you'd have to offer that to the person if you wrongfully did so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because when you were saying that, I kind of thought about it like, well, wait, what if I did that? Like, right? Like, there's repercussions.
Right. The state law really doesn't have anything about those type of clawback or offering it to the tenant, but the City of San Diego and
Chula
the
Vista.
City of Chula Vista's ordinances do, because they saw, there's the potential for abuse.
And I heard something also about ethnicities too.
Ethnicities?
with Chula Vista, right? Like if you're Hispanic, African American, I don't know if this is a rumor or not, but then you'll have to pay them anywhere from 3 to 6 months and relocation costs.
Well, that may be if it's discrimination.
Got it.
Certainly ethnicity, national origin come into play with housing discrimination.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other area of the law on top of landlord-tenant law.
Yeah.
And can be the basis for a lawsuit. Obviously, if a landlord, is making a decision because their tenant is Hispanic or any
Yeah.
other ethnicity or race or those things, that's illegal.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So, so are you envisioning, like, do you project that tenant law in San Diego and Chula Vista is going to get more strict, or do you think it's going to ease up? We're getting further and further away from this like moratorium period. But I also know that certain things that provide control mechanisms that get put in place are really hard to remove from being put in place. So what is your opinion on where we're going with some of these rules? Are they going to stay for longer? Do you think they'll be modified? Do you think it'll be more strict or less strict over time?
Well, I don't think they're going to become less strict, like in favor of landlords, making it easier for landlords. What the landlord-tenant landscape is going to look like in another 2 years or 5 years, that I don't know. Part of it comes down to just lobbying.
Yeah.
The legislature up in Sacramento, when a bill comes before the legislature, who's doing the lobbying? Is it tenants advocates? Is it landlord groups? And who has the legislature's ear?
Wow.
And the same is true even at the local level. City council, whose ear do they have?
Gotcha.
And so that I can't say. I can see that the pandemic, I think one thing to me is clear. The pandemic made the legislature and cities much more aware of the need for, they call it not rent control, but stabilization, housing stabilization.
Yeah.
And especially with housing becoming less and less available. And one of the, part of it is not enough is being built fast enough, but also we have a lot of Airbnbs.
Yep.
Landlords are turning their rental properties into Airbnbs.
The short term, yeah.
So rental pool of available units is not growing very much. And so, it's putting more and more tenants in a bind. And tenants who are even middle class or well-to-do.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about some of those. Well, actually, all those things you just mentioned, we talk about on the Mortgage Trust podcast every week, and supply and demand issues, number one. But but the subsets of that is what you're mentioning. I mean, there's rules in place on how quickly people are going to be evicted, and there's available home, right? And there's another rule about these neighborhoods are now clamping down, and you cannot do short-term rentals in here anymore. So maybe that would free up some supply coming up. But I mean, I'm not surprised that you're saying that when it comes down to it, it's like who's lobbying to the politicians. I'm not really surprised by that. But, also, again, it's like, well, which side's going to win with a louder voice? The one with more money, the one with more support, the one with more action, the one with more whatever. And in this landlord tenant battle, it's highly individualized, but also I know that there's a variety of investor owners. It's not just, I'm a single person or I'm a sole person and I own one place. And it's not always, I'm a massive corporation, I own 1,000 doors. Yeah. There's so much in between those two like extremes that there has to be some sort of like viability for flexibility in the law itself, but also the interpretation of the law and the application of that.
Yeah.
Is that overstated?
Yeah,
is that overstated, or is that kind of like
no? There needs to be the law is there, and you have the market, whether it's rental market or in any market, and for the market to behave in a healthy way, so that supply is coming in and demand, to meet demand, you got to have a lot of things, including a clear and I think balanced legal system. And here, some people argue, landlord-tenant law is all in favor of tenants. And tenants advocate groups will certainly say, no, it's all geared towards landlords.
Of course.
Right. So point the finger at each other.
And they may both be right. And it's going to change, but how it's going to look in 2 to 5 years, I'm not sure. Probably a little more to protect stabilization of housing.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. We're like new investor coming in. We're starting to see a lot of those that are coming in, doing the fix and flip. And now there's this new BRRRR thing, right? Where people are buying, rehabbing, renting, and repeating the process. It's the whole BRRRR thing, right? What would you advise like a new entrepreneur that's stepping in? What kind of advice would you give them as far as who they should be hiring to help them stay away from going to court?
Well, the biggest issues I see with those, the clients I have who are in that situation usually have financial issues. And that is because they're getting a loan. Maybe it's from a hard money lender. Maybe it's from some other source with fairly high interest rate. it's not a legal loan, but it's just high interest.
Yeah.
And every month that they delay in doing that rehabbing is just eating into their profit.
Yes.
And if they go too long, then the whole financial thing just sort of goes belly up.
Yeah.
And so it's not really a legal tip or legal advice,
Yeah.
but it's looking at making sure you've got a contractor, whoever's working with you, who's going to do things promptly.
Yeah.
And even before you get into that, figure out how quickly or how slowly your city is processing permits.
Oh my God.
And
Yeah.
since the pandemic, that's been a real issue in many
Yeah.
cities around.
It's
San
been that
Diego
and
County.
SDG&E.
Yeah.
SDG&E is the biggest one right now. So
Yeah. No, that's really good advice.
Yeah.
So before I forget, though, I want to ask, is there anything coming up on the November ballot in 2024 that would affect either bankruptcy law or this tenant law we're talking about now? Are there things that you're aware of in your position in the law space that, people need to know about here locally in San Diego? Is there anything that you're aware of or no?
I'm not aware of any ballot propositions that are getting ready for November. There may be. I was looking at in the March special or general or primary election. There was SB 1, I believe, which had to do with housing for mental health people in mental health system.
Okay. Was that about like about districting or not districting, but about like zoning for that or?
No, it was about making existing state money available for housing for people who are, maybe they're coming out of the justice system or they just have mental health issues and they need basic housing.
Yeah.
And so that was passed just barely by the voters. And so it makes existing money available for those types of housing projects.
I wonder where they're going to put them. Maybe in those pods. I don't know if you guys gone on the 5 freeway right before downtown, the right side.
Dude.
There's a bunch of little pods right there, and there's so many of them. It's crazy.
Yeah.
They're probably going to be like, you got the first, second, maybe they'll be on the third floor, maybe is what it is.
Yeah. I don't know exactly what that is.
That's crazy. It's crazy.
I have my suspicions.
Yeah.
But Andy, talking about November, I will say this. Although I'm not aware of there's any ballot proposition or local initiative on city measure in Chula Vista or any other city for November. There probably will be, but what is the biggest thing that I tell people for November, because this is a big general election, presidential election, national, is not only vote, but vote like this is one of the most precious things you have. Because this election, I believe, this is my own opinion, this election is partly about not only electing our leaders, but how much do we want to protect the legacy of a constitution, of not only civil freedoms, but the checks and balance system that protects us individuals from powerful people in Washington having too much power.
Yes.
And
agree.
It's really, it's not the voting itself, it's the approach that I think Americans need to sort of reinvigorate as they're thinking about voting and they're voting in November. I think that's the most important thing.
That's awesome.
Thanks for that
Thank you
advice.
for sharing that. Yeah, and I know that we can probably go down multiple rabbit holes. But
and you don't your listeners probably don't want to hear my own political views, and so I'm not going to.
No,
that.
it's okay. We already know. No Kanye West.
No. Yeah, definitely not.
Although my wife does like Kim Kardashian.
Well, yeah.
Well, no, I was going to say, I know there's a lot of different rabbit holes we can go down, but I mean, this has been highly educational. I mean, I think of all the shows we've done, this has been the least I've interjected or talked with a guest because you have so much information to share and such a depth of knowledge with, 30 plus or minus years of, being a lawyer. But before I forget to mention, how can people watching this, how can they reach you? What's the best way if people have questions to follow up from this episode? I'm going to leave it in the description box below. So what's the best way that you would want people to reach you if they need to or want to?
Easiest ways are my office phone number, 619-946-7193. You can also check out my website. It's www.jturnerlawgroup.com. It's just the letter J and then Turner Law Group. And my email address, good way to reach me, is jturner@jturnerlawgroup.com.
Awesome.
So those are 3 easy ways to get a hold of me.
Yeah.
Great.
No, it's very refreshing to have different insight too, with
Yeah.
the tenant laws, the tenant rules, understanding the bankruptcy, giving that hope to, the regular consumers, the owners of companies, because a lot of times they feel like there's no way out of this. And the only way out sometimes is just having that realization that you're not going to get out if you just don't get with the right people, the right attorney that's just going to help you just, again, take that burden off your back. Because sometimes it's just a burden that's holding you back from your full potential just because you're overthinking. And I know I've been there, done that, and it's like sleepless nights, And I'll tell you, when we got all done with our BK back in, 2010, 11, it's been great. It's been a great ride after that, So
Yeah.
we certainly appreciate people like you just stepping up to the plate. And I know you did it because obviously you want to rebuttal against your parents, and I'm sure you're much better. But, it all worked out.
They love me, although they still, especially like we get together at Thanksgiving or Christmas, and it's like rolling their eyes. Okay, well, here comes Jason with his argument.
Here goes Jason with his tangents.
Yeah. And it's only because they know you're going to win, Jason. That's what it is, right? Like, we hate losing. So, but
Like, I don't like you argue with me, but I'm really glad you're successful in life as an attorney.
Yeah.
yeah. And this is just great because what we do with Friends of Mortgage Heroes is we want to encourage people to just get the right information and do the right thing, And I mean, encouragement, it's like, even if there's all these tenant laws that we have in place, I know other states like Arizona, investors over there say, like, you're still buying property in San Diego. Why would you do that? Kind of like, well, one, I already know the appreciation, it's simple economics here. And so it's cool to have that encouragement, that knowing that you just got to do things the right way.
Yeah. Well, and I also want to make sure that, we talk about on our channel abroad, on our shorts, our clips, our segments, our long form shows, we talk a lot about finance and economics and what you can do to get into real estate and get home. But if you are already in real estate and you are having a challenge, then we want to bring a resource like Jason on. This is certainly not a method. Talking about bankruptcy is not a method for originating more loans. It is not a method for helping people get into homes, at least for today. But if you need a fresh start and you need that fresh start and to set a course of action over the next 3, 5, 7 years so that you can get back into real estate, then this is why we want to have people like Jason here. So Jason, thank you for being here. It's been awesome. And I learned a lot from just listening today. I did a heavy dose of listening today, which I'm very grateful that I did. But I have one question for you. One last question.
Yes, sir.
What is something that you would have wanted us to ask that we did not ask you that you would like to share? Is there anything?
Yeah.
Is there anything that you're like, oh, I wish they would have asked me this?
Well, I will tell you, if you ask me, did any successful people in the past ever file for bankruptcy?
Oh, that's a great one. Okay.
And I will tell you the answer, yes. And it really just sort of follows up, or it's my final statement sort of emphasizing what we've been talking about all along. You think of people like Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Harry S. Truman, Durant, the guy who founded General Motors, H.J. Heinz, Walt Disney, all tremendously successful people in this country. All early on in their careers, not at the height, but early on, they each had to file bankruptcy because of business. Abe Lincoln, he started a grocery store with some partners, and it just failed.
I did not know that.
But and the thing is, if they had not filed for bankruptcy and gotten each of them discharged with debts and been able to move on, we may not know them today.
Yeah.
Wow.
Walt Disney.
God, that makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah. But that is what, when we think of successful people in this country, we think, oh, well, they're brilliant, and they maybe are. Oh, they've always been successful. No, not quite. The difference is, however, they found a solution for each setback or each obstacle. And in the case of financial things, they saw, okay, I need to get beyond this debt so I can move on to better things. And that's what I often remind my clients is, bankruptcy is not like some statement of failure. It's about, okay, I have a problem. This is a solution.
Yeah.
I want to get beyond the problem. I want to solve this.
What about Durant? What did he fail on?
Well, it was before he founded General Motors. He was dabbling in cars. It's in the 1890s, I think, 1880s. And he started a company, but it just didn't work. And so he had to file for personal bankruptcy. And a few years later, he started the company that became General Motors.
Wow, that's pretty cool, man.
so
Thank you for
crazy.
sharing that. Those are pretty cool. Go Abe Lincoln.
I'm so
I
glad
never knew that.
I'm so glad.
Groceries.
We usually ask that question of the whoever our guest is, like, what's something we should have asked you, we didn't know to ask. That's a great one.
Yeah,
That's
thank you for
fantastic.
sharing
And
that
then
one.
A lot of people obviously know these household names. H.G. Heinz too. Ketchups. We have ketchup
Yeah,
today
dude.
because of bankruptcy.
Here's the reason. The story with H.J. Heinz was he thought that cucumbers were going to be the next great condiment. And so he's, putting.
Well, hold on. Those are pickles.
Yeah.
They're pre-pickles.
free pickles.
Yeah.
He thought different types of products with cucumbers were going to be great, and it failed.
Oh, wow.
And he had a lot of debt, and he was miserable about it. And at one point he even wrote, "I don't even have enough money to buy gifts for my kids for Christmas, and for my wife." But he did a bankruptcy, and then a couple of years later, he stumbled on the idea. Wait a minute, using tomatoes we might be onto something, and started using tomatoes, started making ketchup, different products.
Oh, wow.
And hence we have the H.J. Heinz company. That's a mega company.
Wow. That's crazy.
That's super cool.
That's awesome.
I'm gonna
Thank
go
you.
Google this.
Yeah, we got so many cool stories. We're gonna all this research later. Like, who else famous has filed bankruptcy? What business titans have filed bankruptcy?
But it's so true, right? Like we all have to go through our own journey to realize
Yeah.
that there's going to be something else. And
Yeah.
a lot of times because we have this burden, this debt, and then relationships matter.
yeah,
But you have big issues with the
Yeah.
wife.
yeah,
Then you pour that onto the kids. It's like, I'm just glad that we have this safety net that we can just, call people like you, Jason, please help us out, right? And you get us moving in the right direction. Well, we can save a marriage. We can save our family. And, as we get younger, I said, that just becomes a lot more valuable to us more than anything else.
yeah. And Jason, thank you for saying that bankruptcy is not a statement of failure.
Yes,
I think
thank
that
you.
is just something that people they slap that label, that burden on themselves. Even after successfully coming through bankruptcy, there's bankruptcy is a statement
Yeah.
of failure, and you're qualifying today that it is not. And I think that is a great takeaway for people watching.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so Jason, thank you so much for being here on the show, Friends of Mortgage Shows with Will and I today. And for all of you watching, if you need to reach Jason Turner personally, you'll find his contact information in the description box below. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel. And every week we bring you a brand new guest who's a friend of ours to help you navigate and how to win in mortgage and in real estate, better your life, have more success. So thank you, Jason, once again. Will, thank you so
Yes,
much for
thank
being an
you.
awesome co-host today.
Thank you both.
And we'll see you all again next week.
That's it. See you.